She was turned away from the inn injured. The human gave the orc girl his bed. The rain had been falling since the third bell, the kind of rain that doesn't announce itself or apologize, just arrives and stays. Maren Voss pulled her coat tighter and watched the shape at the end of the road. It had been there for several minutes now, crouched against the stone gatepost of Helda's outer wall, and it was too large and too still to be a person, and too deliberate to be an animal. She set down the lantern and walked toward it. The shape resolved into a figure as she got closer. 7 feet of something folded into itself, knees drawn up, one arm wrapped around its middle and the other braced against the wet stone like it was the only thing keeping it from going flat. Green-gray skin. Tusks, short ones, barely past the lower lip, which was split and swollen. The ear on the left side was torn, crusted dark at the edge. The clothes, if you could call them that, were field wrappings, the kind of things soldiers used under armor, and they were soaked through and stained in ways that had nothing to do with rain. An orc, a young one, Maren thought, though she had no real basis for that. The eyes, when they opened, were amber gold and very bright, and they tracked Maren with the flat precision of something that had learned not to trust. Maren stopped 3 feet away. "The gate's locked," she said. "I know, I'm the one who locks it." She crouched down so she wasn't standing over the figure. "You've been turned away." It wasn't a question. The answer was in the way the orc held herself, that particular kind of compressed stillness that comes not from calm, but from having nowhere left to go. Maren had seen it in people before. Soldiers, mostly. People who'd used up the last of their running. The orc said nothing. Her eyes stayed on Maren's hands. "I've got nothing in my hands," Maren said. She turned them over, showed the palms. "See, just me." She sat back on her heels. The cobblestones were cold and wet through the knees of her trousers, and she didn't care. "What's your name?" A long pause, then very quietly in an accent that scraped the consonants, "Gora." "Maren," said Maren. "I run the inn. The Spit and Crossbeam, that ugly building with the green shutters about 30 yards back. You can see the lamp from here if the rain lets up." She tilted her head. "Can you walk?" Gora's jaw tightened. She pushed against the gatepost and got about 6 inches before something in her side made her stop. The sound she made wasn't quite a grunt and wasn't quite a word. "Right," said Maren. "I'll get my cart." She stood, retrieved the lantern, and walked back the way she'd come. She did not run, which would have spooked the orc. She did not look back, which would have been insulting. She walked at the pace of someone who had decided a thing and was doing it. The cart was small and meant for hauling ale barrels, but it served. Maren maneuvered it back down the road, helped Gora onto it with a minimum of fuss. She was heavier than she looked, and she looked like a great deal, and wheeled her to the Spit and Crossbeam through the rain. 3 of her patrons were still up. Aldrich, the grain factor, who slept badly and drank steadily to compensate. The 2 Ferris brothers, who were young enough to think that being awake past midnight was interesting. All 3 of them stood up when Maren came through the door with Gora. "Sit down," said Maren. Nobody sat. "She's injured," Maren said. "She needs the room with the big bed, the one on the 2nd floor, the one I keep for the factors who can't fit in a standard frame. She needs water, she needs clean cloth, and she needs someone to fetch Harville the physician if he's sober enough to walk." She set the lantern on the bar. "Aldrich, you know where Harville lives. Go knock." "Maren," Aldrich's voice had the careful flatness of a man choosing his words. You understand what that is." "An injured person," said Maren. "It's an orc." "An injured orc person," said Maren, "who was turned away from the gate in the rain with a wound in her side that I don't like the look of." She met his eyes. "I'm not asking you to like it. I'm asking you to go get Harville." Aldrich picked up his coat and went. The Ferris brothers sat down. Neither of them looked happy about it, but neither of them left, which Maren counted as adequate. She got Gora up the stairs herself. The orc was semi-mobile, stubborn in ways that involved taking as little help as possible, and then, abruptly, taking exactly as much as she needed, and into the big room. She pulled back the quilt and the orc settled onto the mattress like something that had been standing for a very long time. "The sheets are clean," Marin said. "I washed them 2 days ago." Gora looked at her for a moment, then she looked at the ceiling. "Why?" she said, not accusatory, just the word dropped into the room. Marin thought about it. "You were at the gate," she said finally, "and the gate was closed, and it seemed like someone should do something about that." She pulled the quilt up. "Rest. I'll be back with water." Harville arrived 40 minutes later, smelling of wine but walking steadily, and he worked on Gora's side for a long time with his face arranged in professional neutrality. The wound was from a blade, not a fall. He said so, quietly, to Marin, while Gora lay very still and looked at the ceiling with her amber eyes. "She'll need to stay flat for at least a week," Harville said. "The muscle's torn. If she moves too much before it knits, she'll open it again." "Fine," said Marin. "You understand people are going to hear about this by morning." "I understand that," said Marin. "And that there'll be." "I understand that too," said Marin. "Thank you, Harville. I'll send the fee tomorrow." She sat with Gora until the physician left, then pulled a chair close to the bed and produced a cup of broth she'd heated on the kitchen fire. She set it on the bedside table where the orc could reach it without sitting up. "Is there anyone who needs to know where you are?" Marin asked. A pause, then, "No." Marin nodded. She didn't ask more. Whatever had happened to Gora, the blade, the closed gates, the roads behind her, that was Gora's to carry or Gora's to set down, and it wasn't Marin's business to dig at it. She'd known people who'd come to a place like this, needing a stopped moment, needing someone to just not ask. She could give that. "The broth is good," she said instead. "I made it with the neck bones. There's more if you want it." Gora turned her head and looked at the cup for a moment. Then she reached for it. By morning, the town knew. Marin was sweeping the front step when Councilman Dreth arrived, which put the time at just before the 7th bell, because Dreth ran his errands before breakfast to show everyone how diligent he was. He was a wide man who carried his authority in front of him like a shield, and he had 3 other people with him, neighbors. Marin knew them by sight, arranged in the way people arrange themselves when they want to look like a crowd. "Marin Voss," said Dreth. "Councilman," said Marin. She kept sweeping. "We've had reports." "Of what?" "Of you bringing an orc into the spit and crossbeam last night." "Into a room." "Into the big room on the 2nd floor," Marin said. "The one with the wide frame bed, which I keep specifically for guests who can't fit in a standard. She's a paying guest." This was technically not yet true, but Marin was prepared to make it true. "Is there a law against orcs staying at an inn?" Dreth's mouth compressed. "The gate was locked for a reason." "The gate was locked because it was past the 3rd bell. That's when I locked the gate. I lock the gate, Dreth, because it is my gate, set into my property wall, on the road that my father paid to have paved in the year before I was born." She stopped sweeping and looked at him directly. "If you'd like to discuss the ordinances around who may and may not be a guest at an inn in this town, I'll be happy to do that in front of the council. Shall I send a message to schedule the meeting?" Dreth looked at her for a long moment. "This isn't finished," he said. "I know," said Marin. "Good morning, Councilman." He left. The neighbors drifted after him. Marin went back to sweeping. Inside, upstairs, Gora was awake. Marin could hear the creak of the bed that meant she'd shifted positions. And the broth cup from the night before was on the floor beside the bed, empty. Marin refilled it. The days that followed had a particular quality that Marin recognized, the quality of a thing being decided. She could feel it in the way conversation stopped when she walked into the market, and in the way the Ferris brothers stopped coming to drink at the Spit and Crossbeam, and in the letter she received from Aldrich, the grain factor, apologizing, in careful handwriting. for any trouble his cooperation might have caused her, but explaining that his business interests required him to be somewhat careful about certain associations at the present time. She put the letter in the fire and counted Aldrich out of her life with the same efficiency she brought to counting linen. She found that she did not, particularly, mind the silence. She had made her money and her name over 20 years running a clean house with good food and a fireside that didn't smell of mold, and whatever was coming from the council, they would have to construct a reason for it. She'd given them very little to work with. Gora, for her part, healed the way Harville said she would, flat and slow, with the particular stubbornness of something that had been through worse and knew how to wait. Marin sat with her in the evenings. They didn't talk much at first. Gora's human was halting and came in short constructions, noun-verb enough, and she seemed to find the effort expensive, so Marin stopped waiting for conversation and started talking instead. About the inn, about her father who'd built it, about the road and the gate, and the year the river flooded and all the lower rooms had 2 feet of water in them, and the guests had slept on the tables. Gora listened. Marin was not sure at first whether she was listening or simply enduring. Then one evening Marin was describing the flood and said something about the color of the water, a particular red-brown from the clay upstream, and Gora said, without looking up from the ceiling, "Like the rivers in the Veth reaches. Same color. In spring." It was the longest thing she'd said. Marin sat with it for a moment. "You're from the Veth reaches," she said. "I was," a pause. "My clan is there, was there." She touched the wound in her side, not flinching, just acknowledging. "This is a disagreement about land." "About what? Who has the right to use it?" "What kind of disagreement?" Gora looked at her for the first time in the conversation. Her amber eyes had that measuring quality, weighing, Marin thought, not hostility, measuring what could be said and to whom. "A merchant," she said finally, "named Verth. He wants the cave systems under the Veth Hills. His people use them for storage, trading. There are old passages that run for miles." Her jaw set. "My clan has lived there for 4 generations. He wants it. He is making it difficult to stay." "Difficult how?" "He found people who disagree, turned the local towns against us, said things about Orcs, things that were not true and some things that were partly true, and all of it arranged to make one conclusion." She stopped. "I was sent to find help, negotiators, people who know law, a beat. I found instead a gate." Marin was quiet for a moment. She was thinking about Dreth and about Verth. She knew the name vaguely, as one knows the names of men who move through towns like weather, purchasing and arranging and leaving the arrangements for others to weather. "Is there anyone," she said carefully, "who can speak to your clan's claim, documents, a record of tenure?" Gora looked at her. "Why?" "Because this sounds like the kind of thing that has a solution," Marin said. "Not an easy one, but a solution." She put her hands on her knees. "I know a woman named Scholar Den. She lives 3 streets over from the council hall. She's about 70, she eats too little and argues too much, and she has spent 40 years documenting the settlement laws of this region. If your clan's occupation of the Veth Caves is older than Verth's claim, she will know how to prove it." She paused. "She also, specifically, does not like Verth. He tried to purchase her archive once and she sent him the letter back in pieces." Something shifted in Gora's face. Not quite a smile, the musculature was different, the tusks moved a fraction, the skin around the eyes changed. But something in that territory. "You would do this," Gora said. "I'd introduce you," Marin said. "The rest is yours to do." It took another 10 days for Gora to be well enough to walk without Harville's warning about the stitches becoming relevant. In those 10 days, Marin learned that Gora had been trained as a clan speaker, the Orc equivalent of a diplomat and a lawyer at once, and that she was 26 years old by human reckoning, which was young for a clan speaker, but her predecessor had died of a fever 2 winters ago, and there was no one else. That she liked the broth with the neck bones and was indifferent to the roasted vegetables, but ate them anyway because Marin put them there. that she found the sound of rain tolerable, and the sound of the Ferris brothers tolerable also. When they came back, they did come back. Eventually, the pull of cheap ale and a warm fire being stronger than their social discomfort, and that she did not like the Chandler's dog, which barked at her each time it saw her in the upstairs window. That she had, when she felt better, a low, dry humor that arrived in the gaps between sentences and was easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. That she was, in fact, paying attention to everything. Marin caught her at it one morning, watching the street below from a chair she'd moved to the window. Cataloging, Marin realized, the way traffic moved, who came and went, who paused to look up at the inn and with what expression on their face. She was doing intelligence work in the way of someone for whom it had become automatic. "You're preparing for the council meeting," Marin said. "There will be one," Gora said. It was not a question. "Almost certainly." Marin pulled a chair beside her. "Dreth's been quiet for 2 weeks, which means he's building a case rather than making noise about one. That's worse." She looked at the street. "He'll probably try to invoke the public safety provisions. There was an incident years ago. An orc traveling through was involved in a bar fight. No one died, but it made the record. He'll use it." Gora absorbed this, and if he succeeds, then you're expelled from town, which means you can't meet with Den, which means you can't begin the documentation process, which means Verth's claim on the caves goes uncontested. Marin laced her fingers. Which might be the actual point. Gora was quiet. "Then, he knows I'm here." "Verth. He has people in every town between here and the Veth reaches. He's very thorough." She touched the wound again. "This was not a random disagreement. In the past 3 weeks ago, they knew my route." Marin let that settle for a moment, then she stood up. "I'm going to talk to Den today," she said. "Regardless of the council, we start the process now so that if they do expel you, there's already a record started. A partial record is harder to ignore than none at all." She looked at Gora. "And tomorrow, if you can walk, I want to introduce you to the Ferris brothers." Gora blinked. "The young ones who drink badly and argue about sport." "Tomas used to work for the Road Survey Office," Marin said. "He spent 4 years mapping cave systems in the Northern Territories before he came back here and started drinking badly. And his brother Pell has a friend in the provincial archives who owes him money." Gora was quiet for a moment. Then she made the sound that Marin had come to recognize as the orc equivalent of a dry laugh. Scholar Den was exactly what Marin had described. 73, small, with the kind of energy that had been compressed by age into something denser and more dangerous than it had been spread out in youth. She received them in a room so full of documents that the chairs were navigational puzzles, and she listened to Gora's account of the Veth reaches with her head tilted and her eyes sharp as a bird's. "Verth," she said, when Gora finished. "The name came out the way you might say the name of a bad tooth. I know exactly what he does, and I know exactly how he does it. He purchases local grievance and converts it into law." She folded her hands. "The cave tenure question is actually quite clear if your clan's occupation predates the territorial settlement charter of this province, which I believe it does. The tricky part is that the charter uses language that was written before anyone thought to ask whether it applied to orc settlements. So there is room for a dishonest interpreter to argue it doesn't." "And an honest one," Gora said. "An honest interpreter would note that the purpose of the clause was to protect prior habitation, that your clan's habitation is demonstrably prior, and that excluding it on a technicality is both legally thin and morally bankrupt." Den picked up a pen. "I'll need the founding dates of your clan's habitation, the names of the first generation that settled, and any material evidence of continuous occupation. Carvings, middens, tools recovered from the lower caves, anything that can be dated." "I have a record cloth," Gora said. "My clan keeps them. It's back in the Veth reaches." "Can you get it?" A pause. "If I go back, I cannot be sure of returning safely." Then we work with what you have and we subpoena the rest. Den looked at Marin. The council meeting when? 2 weeks, I think. Maybe less if Dreth wants to move before we can prepare. He'll want to move fast. He always does when there's a merchant behind him. Den made a note. I'll write to the provincial ombudsman today. An inquiry letter creates a public record of the dispute, which limits Dreth's options without actually forcing his hand. It gives us time. She looked at Gora over the rim of her spectacles. You are a clan speaker, yes. You know the protocols for formal dispute. I do. Good. There are things I cannot say in that chamber as an advocate that you can say as a party. We'll coordinate. She set down the pen. Also, and I say this as a practical matter, not a judgment, your human is very good. Better than most advocates I've worked with. The grammar has oddities, but the logic is clean. Whoever taught you, they taught you well. Gora looked at her for a moment. I taught myself, she said. From a trading dictionary and 8 years of listening. Den looked at her over the spectacles for a second longer. Then she wrote something on a separate piece of paper and pushed it across the desk to Gora. There's a woman in the eastern part of town who lends books. Tell her I sent you. Read these 3, they're on record law and they're dry as chalk, but they'll give you the vocabulary for what we're going to do in that chamber. Gora took the paper without looking at it. She was still watching Den. You do not ask, she said, whether I am telling the truth. Den picked up her pen again. I've been doing this for 40 years, she said. I know what truth sounds like when it's tired and trying not to show it. Now go, both of you. I have letters to write. The council meeting came on the 14th day, which meant Dreth had been in less of a hurry than Marin expected, which in turn meant he was more confident than she liked. He had people in the gallery, not a mob, nothing so obvious as that, but enough faces she recognized as Verth adjacent to make the shape of it clear. The chamber was the town's largest formal room, which meant it was medium-sized and cold and smelled of old paper, and the particular kind of serious self-importance that gathers in places where decisions are made and argued about indefinitely. 7 counselors sat at the bench. Dreth was among them, arranged in a position that managed to be both neutral and central. He had the expression of someone who had already decided the outcome and was performing the deliberation as a courtesy. Gora stood beside Marin and Den at the claimant's table. She had braided her hair back. She wore the formal wrapping cloth of a clan speaker. Marin had not known she had it with her, but apparently she'd kept it rolled at the bottom of the traveling pack, and her back was straight in the way of someone who had decided that whatever this room thought of her was something she could survive. Dreth opened with the public safety provisions, as Marin had predicted. The language was careful. Not orcs are dangerous, but there is a documented history of incidents involving orc travelers in this region, and the council has a responsibility to maintain public order. He cited the bar fight from 15 years ago. He cited 2 other incidents that Marin had not known about, and that Den leaned over to whisper were, on examination, considerably more complicated than the framing suggested. He then pivoted, and this was where it became interesting. He moved from Gora's presence in the town to Gora's purpose in the town. He knew about the Veth reaches. He knew about the caves. He had documents. Marin recognized the style of them. The too clean paper and the too careful wording of something commissioned rather than found, arguing that the caves were unclaimed common land that had been informally used by various parties over the years, and that the Orc clan's claim of exclusive tenure was unsupported. He did not mention Verth by name. He did not have to. When his time was done, Den rose. She was 73 and small, and she had a voice that could have cut glass. She took apart the safety argument first, piece by piece, with the flat precision of someone who had been doing this for 40 years and had run out of patience for the performance of it. The bar fight had been mutual. The other incidents were, on examination, defensive responses to prior provocation. She cited the dates, the records, the names of the investigators. She had them all memorized. Then she turned to the cave tenure documents and she did something that Marin had not quite expected. She didn't argue them. She held them up. "The council has been provided documents," she said, "that purport to establish the cave systems of the Veth reaches as unclaimed common land. I would like to ask the council from whom these documents originate and through what process they were obtained." Silence in the chamber. "Because I have here," and she produced her own papers, the ones she had been building for 2 weeks, the ones Marin and Tomas Ferris and his friend in the provincial archives had helped to compile, a preliminary record of continuous orc habitation in the Veth cave systems beginning approximately 140 years ago, predating the provincial settlement charter by a decade. The clan's occupation is not in dispute by any disinterested party. The only dispute is manufactured by an interested one. She let that sit. Then Gora stood. She spoke in the flat, clear human of someone who had learned it from a trading dictionary and 8 years of listening, and she did not perform grief or outrage or any of the things that might have made the counselors feel that they were being appealed to emotionally. She presented the case. She named the facts, the generations, the dates, the cave systems, the passes and the passages. She described what Verth's people had done in the past 3 weeks ago without calling it what it was, simply as an incident that has made direct return to retrieve primary documentation temporarily inadvisable. She described the sword and the rain and the gate in the same tone she used for everything else, and the chamber was very quiet. At the end she said, "I am asking for time. Not favor, not exception, time, and a formal record of this dispute's existence, which is a right under provincial law for any claimant regardless of species. If there is a law that says otherwise, I will hear it. If there is not, I am asking the council to do what the council is for." Dreth called for a short recess. Marin sat with Gora in the corridor, on a bench that was too hard and faced a wall that was water-stained in the shape of an old map. The Ferris brothers were outside. Pell had been at the back of the gallery taking notes, quietly, for reasons that would become useful later. "You were good in there," Marin said. Gora looked at her hands. "I said what was true. That's what being good in there means." A pause. "He will not concede easily," Gora said. "Verth. Even if the council grants the time, he will find another way." "Probably," Marin agreed. "You are not worried." "I'm quite worried," Marin said. "I just find that worry without a next step is a waste of worry." She looked at the water-stained wall. "The provincial ombudsman's inquiry letter went out 12 days ago. We should have a response within the month. Once there's a provincial record, it's much harder for Verth to manufacture a local one. It doesn't solve everything, but it narrows what he can do." Gora was quiet. Then, when I was turned away from the gate, she said, "I had decided that I had failed, that the only thing remaining was to find somewhere to stop moving and then to stop." Marin looked at her. "I had been traveling for 18 days, Gora continued. 4 towns, the gate was the 4th gate." Her jaw tightened fractionally. I was not thinking clearly about next steps." Marin did not say anything for a moment. She was thinking about the shape at the gate post, the particular stillness of something that had used up its running. She was thinking about what it meant that she had almost walked past it, had almost written it off as an animal and gone back inside. "Well," she said finally, "you're here now." It was not very much to say. But Gora's expression shifted, that non-smile that lived in the movement of the tusks and the skin around the amber eyes, and she didn't say anything either, and Marin thought that was probably sufficient. The council came back from recess and voted 5-2 to grant the formal dispute record and the 30-day period for documentation. Dreth voted against. So did a counselor named Maeve, whose business dealings with Verth's associates were a matter of record that Den had noted, quietly, in the margin of her own copy of the proceedings. It was not a victory. It was time, which was what they'd asked for. Walking back from the chamber through the late afternoon streets, Marin felt the specific quality of a battle not over but stabilized. The line held, the position maintained, nothing won and nothing lost in a permanent sense. It was the feeling she associated with the good days in the first decade of running the inn, when she'd been learning what it meant to fight for a place and to hold it. Gora walked beside her, slower than she would in a week or two. The wound was still there, still making itself known on longer distances, but straight-backed and looking at the street with those measuring amber eyes. They passed the chandler's shop. The chandler's dog, an old gray terrier, appeared in the doorway and barked 3 times at Gora. Gora looked down at it. "Every day," she said, "every day this dog." "He barks at everyone," Marin said. "He barks differently at me." Marin considered this. "He's old and he's afraid of things he doesn't recognize. He'll stop eventually." She paused. "Or he won't, and we'll just have to listen to it." Gora looked down at the dog for another moment. Then she crouched carefully, mindful of the wound, and held out the back of her hand the way you might to let something smell you without feeling cornered. The dog barked twice more, then it put its nose toward the hand, sniffed, barked once unconvincingly. Then it walked over and sat next to Gora's knee. Marin watched this with an expression she kept carefully neutral. Said Gora and stood up. Verth's response to the council's decision came not through the council but through the inn. This was, Marin reflected, consistent with how he operated. The oblique approach, the pressure applied where it was least expected. 3 days after the hearing, she received notice that the Merchants' Association, of which she was a long-time member, having joined because her father had joined, and she'd never seen a reason to stop, was opening a review of her membership status on grounds of reputational conduct potentially prejudicial to the commercial interests of member businesses. It was a very long way of saying, "We hear you're housing an orc and we'd like you to stop." She wrote back that she welcomed the review and would be happy to provide documentation of her compliance with all relevant standards, and that she looked forward to a formal hearing in which the grounds of the complaint would need to be specified and substantiated. She showed the letter to Gora that evening. Gora read it slowly, carefully, as she did with all written things, and then set it on the table. "He's not going to stop," Gora said. "No," Marin agreed, "but he's also not going to be subtle about it anymore, which means we can see what he's doing." She poured 2 cups of the good tea, the leaf kind, not the bark kind. The subtlety was the dangerous part. This is just noise. Noise that can still do damage. "Yes," Marin handed Gora a cup, "which is why we need the provincial record completed before he can convert the noise into something with teeth. Tomas's survey maps, are they enough?" "They will be," Gora said. "If we can attach the record cloth from the reaches, I need to get it." "Can you send for it?" "I've sent messages. My cousin knows where it is kept." "But the passes," she stopped. "If the passes are watched," Marin said slowly, "then we need to come at it a different way," she thought. "Is there a water route, the Veth rivers? The Silverun comes down from the eastern caves. It's navigable in late spring. For another 3 weeks, maybe 4. Marin was quiet for a moment. Then, "Pel Ferris," she said, "has a trading boat. He uses it for the river commerce, the eastern routes. He owes his friend a debt that I have been informed is transferable." She looked at Gora. "If we paid that debt." Gora looked at her, that measuring look longer than usual. "You are spending a great deal," she said finally. "For a stranger, for an injured person at a gate." "Guests are guests," Marin said. "Marin," the name said plainly. Not an argument, not a challenge, just the name. The way someone says it when they want to say, "I see what you are doing and I would like to understand it." Marin set down her cup. She thought about what to say. She thought about her father who had built the inn and paid for the road and who had once told her, when she was 7 and watching a traveler get turned away from somewhere, that the only question worth asking was, is there a door, and is there someone on the other side who needs to come through it? My father used to say, she started and then stopped and tried again. I have a door, she said, and I can open it or I cannot open it, and I have found over a number of years that I sleep better on the nights when I open it. She paused. That's probably not a very satisfying answer. It is a very honest one, Gora said. They sat with that for a while. The fire was low and the evening was quiet. The Ferris brothers had gone home. Aldrich was long gone. The inn was just the two of them and the creak of old timber and the rain starting again on the roof. Then Gora said, "My clan, we have a word. It does not translate cleanly. It means the person who stands in the threshold, between what is and what might be. Not a leader, not exactly. The one who holds the door." Marin looked at her. "It is a valued thing," Gora said, "in my clan's understanding." She turned the cup in her large hands. "I wanted you to know that." Marin was quiet for a moment. Then, "Thank you," she said, meaning it without fuss. The boat trip took 8 days. Pel Ferris navigated the Silverrun with the competence of someone who had done it sober and drunk and in various weather conditions. And Gora was a quiet and useful passenger who knew the river better than he did from the eastern approach, and who, on the second day, spotted the scouts on the northern bank before Pel did, and redirected them through the secondary channel with the calm authority of someone who had been in worse. The record cloth was in a cave in the eastern Veth system that you reached by climbing a narrow passage and squeezing around a water curtain, and then descending into a chamber that smelled of mineral cold and very old time. Gora found it wrapped in oilskin behind a crevice in the south wall. She unwrapped it and checked it with the care of someone handling something that was also a kind of heart. "This is the founding generation," she said, pointing to marks that Marin could not read. "These are the cave names, the passage dates, the births and the deaths." She rolled it carefully. 140 years. "More than Verth has," Marin said. "More than Verth has." On the way back they were stopped once, at a crossing, by two men who had the look of hired enforcement, and who became significantly less confident when Gora stepped off the boat and stood to her full height and asked them, in the flat, clear voice of a clan speaker conducting formal business, for their names and their employer's name, and their reason for blocking a licensed trading vessel on a public waterway, because she would be recording all three for the provincial dispute record. They stepped back, they left. Pel Ferris from the boat gave a small appreciative sound. "You've done that before," he said. "A clan speaker's voice," Gora said, climbing back aboard, "is the only weapon that works in more situations than it fails." Back in Helda, the Merchants Association review had concluded in Marin's favor, apparently because Den had sent them a letter about the conduct of the review itself that had resulted in 2 members resigning, and one writing a formal apology to Marin. Den did not explain the specifics of the letter. Marin did not ask. The provincial record was submitted on a Thursday. Den certified it, Gora signed it, Marin witnessed it, and Tomas Ferris delivered it to the provincial office in person because he knew the archivist and could confirm its receipt. The archivist, a small, tired woman who had spent 30 years processing documents with the dedication of someone who understood that documents were the only bulwark between law and chaos, looked at the record and said, "This is thorough," which Tomas reported was the highest praise she had ever given to anything. 3 days after submission, they received a notification that Verth had filed an objection. Den read the objection. She set it down. "This is the argument I expected, and it's weaker than I hoped," she said. "He's running out of room." Gora read it. "He claims the record cloth is fraudulent," she said. Her voice was even. "He can claim it," Den said. "He can't prove it without an authenticator, and every authenticator in this province is either independent or on the public record. He'd have to find one willing to lie under oath in a provincial case." She paused. "He might. He's done worse, But it takes time, and time is what we have. Gora was quiet for a moment. Then she set the document down and looked at the window. When this is resolved, she said, and my clan's claim is established, what Verth loses is not just the caves. He loses the route. The trading routes he's been running through the Veth passes for the last 6 years. Some of them, she paused, measuring words, not strictly licensed. He has a great deal to lose. Good, said Den. He will try something else, Gora said. Something larger. He'll try, Den said, and we'll document that too. The something else came on a Tuesday in the early morning in the form of a fire. Not at the inn. Marin was up before dawn, as she always was, and she smelled it before she saw it, but at the document archive 3 streets over, where Den kept her collection. Marin ran. The archive was not burning badly. The building was stone, old stone, the kind that resists fire by sheer indifference. But the wooden annex at the back, where Den kept the recent working documents, was fully alight. People were in the street with buckets. Den was in the middle of it, in a nightgown and boots, conducting the firefighting with the precise authority of a general who happened to be wearing insufficient clothing. Gora arrived a few seconds after Marin, having heard the noise from the inn's 2nd floor, and without pausing she went straight into the annex. Marin went in after her. Inside it was hot and smoky and orange-lit, and full of the specific chaos of a fire not yet certain of itself. The working documents were on shelves along the far wall. Gora was there already, pulling bundles down, her height giving her access to the upper shelves that Marin couldn't reach without climbing. She passed armloads to Marin without looking, moving fast and systematic, and Marin carried them out and came back, and they did this, until the ceiling made a sound that both of them recognized as a warning, and they left. On the street, coughing, with the armloads of documents piled on the cobblestones, Den materialized beside them and began sorting through the rescued materials with the eyes of someone doing inventory. The provincial submission, Marin said, still coughing. Already at the provincial office, Den said. This was the working copies. The originals are safe. She held up one of the bundles. And this was the most important of the working copies. She looked at Gora. You knew which shelf. You told me, Gora said. When we were organizing, the upper right shelf was the Veth materials. Den looked at her for a moment. Yes, she said. I did tell you that. The fire investigation concluded, 3 weeks later, that the annex fire had been set deliberately, by persons unknown, using accelerant through a back window that had been left unlocked. The report was filed with the provincial magistrate. Den added it to the dispute record. The dispute record was now thick enough to be a substantial burden. Verth's formal objection was heard by the provincial tribunal 6 weeks after submission. Marin went. Gora went. Den went and argued for 4 hours with the relentless focused energy of someone who had been preparing for 40 years for a room exactly like this one. Gora spoke for the clan and produced the record cloth and answered questions about it in the flat, clear voice of a clan speaker, and declined to be rattled by the opposing advocates' attempts to rattle her, which were numerous and eventually became monotonous. The tribunal ruled in 3 parts. First, that the Orc clan's tenure in the Veth caves was established and predated the settlement charter. Second, that Verth's documentation was insufficient to overcome the clan's claim. Third, that the provincial magistrate's office would be investigating the fire and certain other incidents in the Veth reaches and the passes. The third part was the one that mattered most. Outside the tribunal building, on the steps, in the early spring light that was still more cold than warm, Gora stood for a moment and was very still. Marin stood beside her and did not say anything, recognizing the kind of stillness that is not an absence of feeling but the temporary containment of a great deal of it. Then Gora said, "My clan needs to know." "Yes," said Marin. "I'll go soon. The passes are safer now with the investigation, and my cousin," she stopped. It has been a long time. Yes, Marin said. A pause. The spring light was pale and thin on the stone steps and the street below. Somewhere nearby, the Chandler's dog was barking at something, its usual way. I will come back, Gora said. She said it plainly as a fact. The documentation will need follow-up. There will be more hearings, and Den says I need to be available for the magistrate's inquiry. She paused. Also, I would like to finish the third record law book she lent me. I'll keep your room, Marin said. A pause. You don't need to do that. I'll keep your room, Marin said again. Gora looked at her for a moment with those amber eyes that missed very little. Then she made the sound that was the closest thing to a laugh that she had, and she said, "The large one, with the wide-frame bed." The large one with the wide-frame bed. They walked back through the spring streets, past the market and the chandler's shop, and the water-stained municipal wall, and the council hall where 7 councilors sat and decided things. Past the gate that Marin locked at the third bell, and that had been locked, on a rainy night some months ago, against a shape crouched at the post. Marin thought about gates, about what they meant when they were locked and when they were opened, and who got to decide which was which. About the 40 years Den had spent making sure there was a record of things that mattered, and the 4 generations Gora's clan had spent living in the dark of the Veth Hills, and how both of those things were a kind of insistence. That being here counted, that having been here counted, that the fact of presence and tenure and the small daily accumulation of a life was not nothing, could not be made into nothing just because someone with sufficient money and patience wanted to make it so. She thought about her father and the road and the gate. She thought about what it meant to hold a door open. They came back to the spit and crossbeam in the late afternoon, and the fire was already going. The Ferris brothers were in their usual spot, arguing about something with the specific energy of people who had no real disagreement but liked the exercise, and the inn smelled of wood smoke, and the neck-bone broth that Marin had put on before they left that morning, because she'd known it was going to be a long day. Gora stopped in the doorway. She looked at the room, the fire, the brothers, the familiar configuration of tables and chairs, and the lamp Marin's father had hung in 1932 that was still the best light in the building. Then she came inside. Marin went to the kitchen to check the broth. She heard, from the front room, the sound of the Ferris brothers' argument briefly redirecting itself toward Gora about some point of river navigation that Tomas thought he knew and apparently didn't, and Gora's low voice correcting him with the dry precision of someone who had actually navigated the river. She heard Pell laugh. She heard the sound of a cup being set down. She stirred the broth. Gora left on the first clear day after the frost, which meant early, which meant the light was still blue when she came downstairs with her traveling pack sorted, and the formal wrapping cloth rolled and strapped to the top of it. The record cloth was inside, wrapped in the new oilskin Marin had purchased because the old one had gotten damp at the edges. The third record law book was on the table with a note in Den's handwriting on the cover that said, "Keep it." Gora read the note. She stood with it for a moment, then she put it in the pack. Marin walked with her to the gate. At the gate they stopped, and Gora turned to look at the town, the road, the inn with its green shutters, the chandler's shop where the gray dog was already awake and watching. The morning light was coming in from the east, and it hit the wet cobblestones at an angle that made them look briefly like something worth looking at. "Same color," Gora said, "as the rivers in the Veth reaches, in spring." Marin looked at the cobblestones. The wet clay brown of them, the early light. "Yes," she said, "I suppose it is." Gora picked up her pack. "I'll write," she said, "when I get there, so you know." She paused. Den told me to use the formal notation for the provincial address but to send the actual message to the inn, because apparently the provincial office loses half its correspondence. Den has opinions about the provincial office. Den has opinions about everything, Gora said, which was the most accurate thing anyone had said all week. She went out the gate and down the road. Marin watched her go, the wide-shouldered shape of her, the traveling pack, the particular way she walked that was a clan-speaker's walk, the walk of someone who had learned to move through spaces that were not made for her, and to move through them anyway with all the dignity she'd brought in. 3 weeks later, a letter arrived. It was short, in the clean, careful human of someone who had learned it from a trading dictionary and 8 years of listening, and it said, "Arrived safely, clan whole, passes clear, investigation proceeding." It said that the record cloth was in the clan speaker's archive, and that 2 senior members of the clan had already given statements to the magistrate's investigators. It said that the first generation's caves were unchanged, that the mountain spring still ran in the lower chambers, that the cold was different this year than last but manageable. At the end it said, "I told my clan about the inn with the green shutters and the wide frame bed and the person who opened the gate. They are calling you Gorithau. It does not translate cleanly. It means something like, the one who stood in the threshold, the holder of the door. I told them you would say it was nothing." They said, "That is what makes it the thing that it is." Marin read the letter twice. Then she folded it and put it in the drawer where she kept the things she wanted to keep. Under the letter her father had written her the year he built the inn, which she had read so many times it was soft at the folds. She went downstairs and checked on the broth. She lit the lamp that her father had hung in 1932. She unlocked the gate. The morning came in gray and ordinary, and full of the particular promise of nothing special, which was, she thought, exactly enough.